On Friday last week, we did what could possibly be considered our most controversial video of the year. It was only the third video, so it's not saying much. But what we did notice from the video, and specifically the comments to the video, is that the majority of people didn't actually understand what the purpose of the video was. And the purpose of the video was not to comment on the RCJ, but it was to speculate on why had the ANC actually taken Israel to court, specifically the RCJ. We couldn't quite understand what it had for them. What benefit were they getting by taking Israel to court? Well, it appears that the benefit is now becoming clear.
So I was looking at the internet over the weekend and I saw this headline, and I quote, ANC claims financial woes are over and it's ready for its costly election campaign. Now, for those long-time viewers of this channel, you know very well, in December, the ANC was almost liquidated. They failed to pay 102 million rand to a service provider several years ago. The Supreme Court of Appeal said they owed the money, despite what Fikile Mbalula was saying. And the sheriff was outside Luthuli House, where they found 117,000 rand in the ANC's bank account. So how can it be that a month ago, the ANC was basically bankrupt, but today they are not bankrupt and they are ready to pay for a costly election campaign? And just so you know, previous election campaigns cost over 1 billion rand in 2019. So is it just a coincidence, Byron, that after we go to the ICJ, the ANC gets all this money?
One could say it's a coincidence. About as much a coincidence as, we breathe air, and therefore, air is a coincidence. It's very easy to infer this, Ramon, because we will recall that suddenly the ANC was really struggling and it had no money there whatsoever to pay its bills. SARS was knocking, staff members were leaving, they couldn't pay for the election posters, Luthuli House was going to get expropriated without compensation. We would have loved to have seen that. But suddenly, without warning, the NC's financial troubles are over. Just like that. Who knew? And then you have to ask yourself, well, how did the ANC raise so many billions? Could be like the EFF and just claim it was donations from, township dwellers. We're not that dumb. Or possibly it could be that some kind of foreign policy maybe had been sold to like a foreign country or something. What do you think of that, Ramon?
Well, here's the timeline. On December the 6th, Hamas came to Johannesburg to meet with Fikile Mbalula. I never thought I'd feel sorry for Hamas, but unfortunately in this case I am. They had to deal with Mr. Fix for Call for a whole day. So they see him on the 6th of December. On the 26th of December, the ANC says, we're going to the International Criminal Court of Justice against Israel because it's perpetuating genocide. And then in January, they actually go to the International Court for Justice. And then later in January, a week after the hearing, the ANC comes out to say, we have no more financial worries whatsoever. Now, I know this is Retardanistan, but the coincidence is just too much on the nose for me. The ANC has been paid something to go to the ICJ and has been paid a lot of it as well because, as I said before, those election campaigns are not cheap. And when you owe SARS 300 million rand, and when you owe staff hundreds of millions, and when you owe businesses and contractors more hundreds of millions, you're going to need a huge amount of money to be solvent again. Yet the ANC is solvent again. Amazing.
Now, you may look at that and say, where's your proof? And we don't actually have any. We're inferring. But you know who else is inferring? Frans Cronje. Because in a recent podcast, Frans Cronje stated previous sales in South Africa, sales if you will, occurred with state capture, whereby we sold the state's resources to the highest bidder. According to Frans, it is highly inferable now that actually what South Africa is selling, because it sold off all the state assets and they're all broken anyway, we're now selling off our foreign policy. Which actually makes sense, because if you think about it, what was the approach that we took to Russia, specifically its military operation in Ukraine? But it looks like the Russians weren't that keen to pay the ANC the money that they wanted. So it would appear, possibly, allegedly, that Iran was. And that is how they've actually solved all of their issues. Now, we speculated about that on Friday, but a lot of people wanted to take us to task around the specifics around the RCJ actual case. And just to be clear, We don't care about the case. We don't live in Israel. We don't live in Iran. It's not our conflict. We don't live in Palestine. You know what is our problem? South Africa, where we live. And this is our foreign policy that yet again the ANC is selling to line its own coffers.
Yeah, and for more evidence of this, October the 7th happened where 1,200 Israeli citizens were murdered by Hamas, and very soon thereafter, Naledi Pandor, our Minister for International Affairs, flew to Tehran, the capital of Iran, to speak to the government of Iran. And that meeting was not to say, oh, how can we help each other? That meeting, according to France Grenier at least, was strategy. All right, how can we now put Israel in a very difficult position? And the strategy seems to be, according to France Grenier, make it very difficult for Jews to join the IDF. And number two, make it very difficult for Israel to be funded by America, based on all this propaganda through the ICJ and other things. And so far, it looks like it is working extremely well. The one thing the ANC does extremely well is this revolutionary propaganda. They learned from the best, the North Vietnamese in the 1960s. They can't run a country, they can't produce electricity, they can't do fuck all else, but they can do revolutionary propaganda extremely well. But of course, in our instance, they will do it for a lot of money.